So some things I liked about this book was that it had an endorsement from the American Diabetes Association. I don't know who to trust for this kind of stuff, and so it had that endorsement at least. It was right on the cover. It's their guide. And another thing I liked about it was that in dealing with the risk of sexually transmitted diseases or the risk of pregnancies for diabetics, she said the best defense was abstinence. Now, she went about it in a medical way and talked about just the medical things and how kids need to have a normal type of life, and then says abstinence is the best policy, which seems like that should be the real normal before marriage. So this book was difficult at times. You know, the book talked about how my son won't be able to join the military, that he won't be able to be a pilot. Talks about complications in the long run for diabetics. And so it just was a book that was difficult for him to listen to. He said he didn't like listening to it. It was a book that was difficult for me. It was difficult for my wife to listen to, but it's important stuff. So it's probably important to steel your mind, prepare yourself for the difficulty it is in listening to this information. It has very basic information that you could listen to right away as soon as you got a diagnosis of diabetes, because it talks about, you know, how to give a shot, and it talks about the very basics that you have to know in dealing with diabetes. Talks about, you know, gets into specific scenarios. The interesting thing is it kind of comes up over and over again that special occasions like birthday parties, hey, you can plan for it and you can let them have a piece of cake. You just have to compensate for it with insulin, but that it has to be planned for. It has to be in moderation. I don't know. Just talks through scenarios. Talks through scenarios of being at school, and you know, who is it at school that can help deal with these situations. And not all schools have a school nurse, and so just real practical situations to go through with diabetes and to think about. It is the necessary thoughts of this is going to be a long-term situation for them, and it's something you have to deal with in the short term, but you have to prepare them for it. And what are the transitions like for a teenager? Or it talks about how it's important to recognize that even if they don't admit it, they like having your help. Talks about the importance of letting the kids know that this is not their fault. It's not something that it's their fault, or even like a younger sibling, that it's not their fault either. To recognize what's happening in siblings' lives. This talks through a lot of the specific situations. What do you do when you go on a trip? And what kind of stuff do you need to make sure that you have with you? It said that glucose tabs were more, they acted quicker, that the glucose could get absorbed straight into your bloodstream. And I don't seem to understand that, because I think you could do that with like, I remember my mother-in-law saying that they would use frosting and put it inside of her mouth, and that would get absorbed in. So we have our little experience with glucose was that it did act quickly, but this book said that it is a quicker acting case of a sugar low. Just a difficult book, but an important book to go through as far as being prepared and dealing with childhood diabetes as a parent. Halle Berry and Jay Cutler are diabetics. That there are people that are functioning at a high level. There's a guy that played in the NBA, and Jay Cutler is a quarterback in the NFL. And so there are people who function at a high level with type 1 diabetes, and that is encouragement for me and for my son, that that he can still do lots of things with his life. So that was a helpful thing to read about in the book. I did I did change. I didn't realize that you could put blood glucose readings into the Dexcom even when you weren't calibrating, just to put it in there for informational purposes. And so we've done a few of those because it's information that we'll be able to reference later, that the doctor can reference, or the nurse practitioner, just information for them to use that will be helpful. It tells one story in the book about a lunch lady that was supervising the kids' lunch at school. And the kid was embarrassed, and so he stopped eating lunch and would end up with a real low in the afternoon because he wasn't eating lunch. Because the lunch lady was looking at what he would take for lunch and supervising it. And it was a kid that was old enough to do that on his own, but just was embarrassed to deal with the lunch lady. And we've already run into that somewhere. People just assume that Crosby can't have pasta at all, or that he can't have birthday cake or special occasion stuff. I thought that was interesting. I know it talked about how at the holidays you have to be careful because mealtime is going to be a different time. That the book says it's important to have a regular mealtime so that it's easier to control sugars and be on top of that stuff. So I thought that was interesting. So it does, we've been told, and it said in the book too, that protein with the carb will slow down the absorption of the carb. I believe fat will as well. And so like a piece of chocolate for a sugar low is not going to act as fast as Smarties will, because there's no protein, there's no fat, there's no fiber, and so that sugar will get absorbed faster in case of a sugar low, that you can do just the straight carbs or something that would be faster. And talking about talking to a counselor and or a pastor or somebody, because we've seen it, a big part of it, it's just the psychological battle of dealing with, this big life change and what has to be done. And so he's getting the job done, but it's difficult, and getting some other people to help with the main caretaker, my wife, getting some other people to help with having the right attitude and strength to get the job done. Not a fun book, a good book, important book, written 6 years ago. So hopefully there's a newer version that will be coming out here soon.